Business Growth Talks podcast is created and hosted by Mark Hayward. In this show, we talk about how to grow a business in the growth stage. The growth stage is often marked by rapid developments, increased revenue, and an escalating customer base. In each episode, we talk to entrepreneurs and business owners who have grown businesses, and we cover topics like scaling processes, market expansion, financial management, human resource and talent development, and customer retention. If you are looking for actionable advice, tips, and techniques on how to grow, run and build your business, this is the podcast for you.
Today we have Nathan Young, who is a fractional CMO at Find Your Audience and a business owner as well. With over 6 years of experience as a leader in marketing operations, Nathan has helped mid-market businesses enhance and support their marketing function and drive value creation. As Vice President CMO Services at Find Your Audience, he helps marketing people develop and implement marketing strategies across different audiences and different industries. Nathan is based in Vancouver, and so we are going to talk to him about his business that he runs as a CMO, fractional CMO, and also at Find Your Audience. Thank you, Nathan, for joining me. Before we go into the first question, if people are enjoying this content and they are not subscribed, could you please subscribe to my podcast across all platforms? And that would be fantastic to help the show. Thank you, Nathan, for joining me. So the podcast is called The Absolute Business Mindset. What does a business mindset mean to you?
I think the business mindset is really understanding that your job as a business owner or a service provider is solving pain points, but solving pain points that, I think, depending on where you are in life, are either very meaningful to you, meaning you will find happiness in your work, which I think is a big thing that I'm learning, or is scalable, meaning is it going to fill that monetary need for you in the future? And I think that's something that's super important. It's very easy to find things that are going to make you a decent amount of money, but aren't necessarily scalable. Or, if you're in a later part of life, are you doing something that really makes you happy and solves a pain point? So I think that's a business mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to, on this show, going to have a lot more focus on business growth. And one of the areas which I'm going to pick particular importance to is actually that scalability idea and being able to grow a business fast and to get to a mature stage of business. For you, what's the definition of scaling a business, and how do you sort of approach it when you're looking at your business or businesses that you work with?
I think there's two parts of scaling a business. One is the market there, and is that market large enough for you to really think that it's going to be a big enough opportunity? So you'll hear this a lot in sales, which is called a TAM, a total addressable market. And the one thing that we do internally when we talk about TAM with the sales teams and the executives is we go, well, what about the accessibility of that TAM, right? So it's really nice to talk big numbers, and you'll see this in all these fancy San Francisco decks, $1 billion problem, blah, blah, blah. But the other thing that I always like to ask is, like, how accessible is the information to actually figure out who this TAM is? And we call that the accessible part of the TAM. And what we might mean by that on a marketing perspective is, do we actually have available data points in the public space for us to actually find these people, find these companies? Because if you can't, then it doesn't really matter about the TAM. Because how are you going to scale if you can't actually access these people in a scalable way? So I think that's one thing, right? So defining the market as accessible and defining it that's big enough. The second thing that I think is really important in terms of scale is operational scalability. So this idea where I think very operationally driven companies tend to succeed because, as many people know, strategy is actually relatively easy, because strategy is really just thinking about the blue sky, having the North Star, but how are you going to travel to that North Star is far harder than figuring out the North Star. So I think scalability to me is those two things. One, it's going to be the market. Is it worth your time? And then the second is your operations ready for that scalability? And do you know what it's going to take for you to get to that point of scalability operation-wise?
Right, we are going to touch on this again, sort of market expansion and operational scalability, because I do want to go into that into more detail. So let's just put that to the side. I will definitely come back to it because it's crucial when you're looking to scale a business. There's got to be a market there, and do you have the infrastructure, the employees to be able to do that in an effective way, or how do you keep your talent as well? But so we'll put that to the side and we'll definitely come back to it. But as more generic question, we're going to go a little bit further back in your history. But the question I want to ask you is, tell me one thing about your upbringing and where it was, which reflects on who you are today.
I grew up, so weird story. I grew up bullied, actually. So it's a sensitive topic, but I was bullied through a lot of my life. And I came up in a business family. So I had parents who I'm going to say weren't necessarily the most emotionally sensitive parents. And I also came up from a childhood where I think I faced a lot of adversity. And there's one thing that, I think I'm very lucky to have is I went through that adversity and I was able to come out with a very different perspective. And I think even without some parental guidance, I was lucky enough to find myself guiding in a healthy direction. And I think the combination of that was really actually how I think I became a bit of a business owner, because when I was younger, rather than kind of, marinating in the negativity that I was receiving in my environment, my brain didn't really actually react that way. My brain was very much like, why? I kept asking questions like, why was I being bullied? Why do people feel like it's okay? Why did they think it was cool? And rather than really just sitting there, and yes, I was sad sometimes, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out why. What was the intention? What were they getting out of this? And that's actually where my mind went a lot. So I think that really led into my business career, because as I was surrounded by business people, because my parents were all business people, I always asked the question, why? Why did that business work? Why is this restaurant better than the other question? And I naturally led this very curious life. So I think that's kind of how my upbringing kind of drove me into this place where I think I'm not going to say I'm a super successful business person, but I'm certainly successful in the sense that I have a 7-figure agency and I have 25 plus employees full time. But like I'm in a point where, I think all of my decisions are based on curiosity. And I really don't necessarily think that I know everything. So when I read something, I want to learn more, and I constantly want to learn more. And I think that's why some of our clients really enjoy working with us, because they know that Nathan and my organization and my team members are always going to also lead with that perspective. They want to learn more. They want to do better. So therefore, we're going to provide better value to our clients.
So we could go off in a lot of different directions. So, so the things that have come to it, the curiosity side, we'll touch base on that. Almost a stoic sort of view on asking the question, why were you bullied? Why was this happening? And stuff like that, which is very interesting. But I want to touch on, because a lot of people go through adversity, and some people fall, and some people like find a way to stand up and keep going. So for you, do you think the resilience that you had from being bullied actually aided you as a business owner and sort of gave you that ability to be able to, when knocked down, to stand back up again?
There's some interesting studies that actually show that a lot, I'm not going to say all, but a majority of very successful CEOs have had some form of childhood trauma. Now, that's not something healthy, right? So it's like, you don't really wish this for anyone. And if you were to ask me, do I wish this on my daughter? Absolutely not. Do I want my daughter to be successful? Absolutely. But do I want to give her trauma? No. And yes, I do think that it builds a level of resiliency, and it's actually a value that I convey within my organization. And the value that I try to convey is I want everyone to be, or to learn to be, comfortable in the uncomfortable, in the unknown, and actually getting comfortable with this idea of not really knowing where you're going to go, because it's, in my opinion, that so long as you see progress and as long as you see movement, that's far better than trying to reach an absolute goal or absolute outcome. And that absolute outcome will happen. And so there's a lot of theory around, goal management and goal descriptions, and how sometimes if your goal is too big, it doesn't feel like there's progress, and therefore there's a negative feedback cycle, and then essentially you don't do it. So I think for me, yes, 100% that resiliency has given me the skills and the experiences needed for me to continue through the hardest times, which then ultimately succeed. And I think that's with anything in life, whether that's relationships or businesses. I feel like if you don't put in the work, you'll never see the best of it, right? And I think the bullying, I 100% feel like created that resiliency at a very young age.
And there's lots of, you're absolutely right, there's lots of stories like the Richard Branson of having dyslexia, or there's people that I've had on my show that have been hugely successful who have had parents dying quite young. And I can just think of an example that immediately sprung to mind, a very successful guy that had trauma. And I do think that there is an element of, to be an entrepreneur, to be a not just a solopreneur, but actually someone who actually has employees and is actually building a business, like the idea of building a business, we have to be a little bit different. We have to be a little bit, you got to be a bit crazy to actually start a business with the risk and stuff that we all face, but we still stick by it and we still do it. And I think there is something about the people that are affected by some sort of trauma, whether it is bullying, whether it is a sort of dyslexia or trauma, are going to be the people that are the outliers. So Malcolm Gladwell, the outliers sort of idea. And I do think that is something that entrepreneurs need an element of to be able to be truly successful and actually keep going. Because there's someone else I interviewed said, like, you've just got to show up every day. You don't have to have a great day, but show up every day and make a difference and add value to your clients is where you're going to win as an entrepreneur. So what actually came first? So I was looking through. So you were CEO and president in BFE Consulting in Hong Kong. You came back to Canada and worked as a CMO at Merchant Broker. What actually came first? Because when the research, it wasn't really clear. Did the roles as a CMO and CEO start first, or did the CMO fractional business, which we talked about at the start, which one came first and which one was more was the inspiration?
So what's not on my LinkedIn is actually my first job coming out of university. So I went to University of BCIT, and I graduated with basically a marketing and entrepreneurship focus. I actually became a VP of finance for a publicly traded company in China at the age of 21. And I was doing a job, which I'm going to say very openly on this call, I was not qualified for. Absolutely not. And I think that was, again, coming back to this whole resiliency perspective where I remember I was in San Francisco doing a presentation to Texas Pacific Group, one of the largest private equity firms. And I was a 21-year-old talking about free cash flow models, and there was no reason for me to doing that. And the only thing I thought about was, I got to do this. I got to figure out how to do this. And so when I was doing that job, all I was doing was like reading like ACCA, which is an accounting book, and the CPA books. The CA books, like literally in my free time, because I was like, I got to be fluent in all this. So I got to figure all this out on my own. And so my background actually started in finance, and then I was doing the management consulting where I was working for angel investors inside of their acquired or invested companies or their portfolio companies. And then essentially I went kind of into more corporate roles where, to be honest, I was working with people I knew and I was driving marketing. And the reason marketing came to be was I was trained in marketing. I always enjoyed marketing. But I was lucky enough to get professional roles outside of marketing. And what I think that has done has given me an amazing perspective as to what marketing really means for the organization, because I've been fortunate enough to work in senior roles that aren't marketing related. So I see marketing in the lens of a different role. And I think that allows me to emphasize marketing towards organizations in what I think is the most meaningful and impactful way, versus just being a typical CMO who has pigeonholed their entire career as being a marketer, which is fine. That means you're an expert. But I think often they forget about other levers that are important to the organization, because marketing is an important lever, but it's not the only lever. And more importantly, it's a lever that can support other levers in the organization, which I think they often forget.
I would agree. I think marketing people often don't see the bigger picture. They're very focused on how they can expand to markets or be able to build a marketing strategy, whether it's Google Ads or whatever mechanism, Facebook Ads, whatever that mechanism is. And they sometimes do forget operations. Well, do you have the right employees in place to be able to get a huge spike within the marketing? And they sort of see, this is a bit of an over exaggeration, but they kind of see their budget for their marketing budget. That's their spend. That's what they need to spend. They don't necessarily see the wider picture of the strategy of the business, where they want to go and things like that. So I think it gives you a really unique lens to be able to work with your clients, to be able to see the wider picture, not just the marketing strategy. So do you think that's given you an advantage working with other companies that some marketing people don't have?
Absolutely, because I'm trying to move my way away from sales, but definitely because we're still very much in a consultative service approach. I think it gives me a very strong ability to empathize uniquely with business owners and empathize with their actual needs, because sometimes I talk about companies. It's like, look, when we talk about marketing dollars, and depending on how we do it, we can maximize value. And here are a couple of ways we can maximize value outside of marketing. So this is the marketing tactic that will have a primary goal of marketing, but here are all the other things that are going to come from that, whether that affects your talent acquisition and your talent management and your retention, whether that's going to help specifically on your partnerships. I really lean into this idea that when we spend marketing dollars, yes, they're hard dollars. Yes, they're P&L'd and accounted for in the marketing line item, but there's a ton of additional supplementary benefits that I think, sometimes aren't highlighted enough and aren't translated well to the other executive members so that they can also view it as a benefit instead of just this hard cost that goes out from the organization.
So let's talk about, for Find Your Audience that you're working at, what is the market expansion? We said we'd come back to what's the market expansion sort of plan for your business?
So my market expansion for our business right now is to really move into the US. So we're predominantly a Canadian run organization. We work with some of the largest kind of category leaders. So we work with the largest IT recruiting company in Canada. We work for the largest software B2B SaaS company in Canada, which is Constellation Software. So we have all these great Canadian brands. And on a top line perspective, they represent well over $1 billion in revenue cumulatively amongst these companies that we work for. So for me, the market expansion is naturally into the US. And then likely, into UK actually probably is the next market. So a lot of our market right now, or a lot of our clients, they are international. So they do work in multiple countries. So we do support them on an international perspective. So we know how to operate within those countries. But predominantly in terms of our sales and the clients that we meet, they tend to be Canadian oriented, where either their secondary office is here and then we end up working for the organization, but we don't really work with a ton of primary US clients. So that's a natural movement for us. So I don't even think we've maximized Canada yet, to be honest. So then on an operational perspective is, do I really want to expand myself in the US when I haven't even maximized the Canada quite yet? So that's something that we're facing. And it's something that, on a growth perspective, I'm thinking about, because as I've mentioned at the beginning of the call, there's two parts, the TAM and the operations. In my opinion, my operations needs to change before I do that. And one of those changes I feel like is actually moving away from our consultative approach and really, really forcing a productized approach towards our service, and then scaling that before I go ahead and go in the United States.
That's interesting. So the sort of standardization, the sort of building a sort of process that can be repeatable and scalable, you sometimes do lose the bespokeness, which a lot of clients actually like. So maybe not necessarily the top coat companies, the mid-sized company, they enjoy working with people that have a bespoke nature of their services. How do you foresee that movement from sort of more bespoke and sort of supporting the client, you said in the consultation side of your business, how are you going to transition into something that's more product driven, that you can then scale it that way?
Well, amazingly, what I think I'm fortunate enough is that we've worked with, well over 70 plus clients, and there's common themes. And so what I feel like is, as much as we do a lot of custom work, a lot of that custom work is actually quite repeatable, in the sense that our scope of work is custom, but the work itself is quite repeatable. And what I mean by that is, a lot of our clients will say, okay, well, these are my priorities. I need demand generation, which is paid media. and I need content. Okay, so those are your two kind of tactics that we need to. Those tactics in themselves are repeatable. I think in this year alone, we've already produced about 8 different websites. That's a very repeatable process that we've really standardized within our organization. So this idea where, we want to provide bespokeness, yes, but what I've started to realize is we're providing bespokeness, but at the end of the day, the tactics are very standard. The approach of how we implement these tactics are very standard. So I'm not overly concerned about the idea of being bespoke, but more like I want to be able to approach clients more particularly in the sense that these are the standardized services and you can choose them rather than us selling what we do right now, which is a managed service retainer, where they essentially rotate amongst these tactics. So I want to be just a bit more prescriptive on the tactics and have that standardized. And the reason I want to do that is because when I'm managing resources, so on an operational perspective, when I'm managing resources and clients have the ability to move their tactical priorities kind of fluently within our organization, the resourcing of that is difficult, and also the execution of it is more difficult. So it's not as efficient. So I don't want to remove the bespokeness 100%, but I do really want to just prescribe and box in that scope just a bit tighter, so that we operationally can do a better job and we can do it more efficiently and we can do it at a better cost. So those are all kind of things that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, that's perfectly sensible. And from an operational point of view, you don't. Do you have the right people in place in the right areas to make that operational sort of shift into more standardized services?
I absolutely do. And so I talked about this on another podcast where I think we climbed the wrong side of the hill. We grew a business on a consultative perspective. And so we grew it up to, again, 20, 25 plus now full-time employees. I'm very blessed and very fortunate that we've done it, but it was probably the steepest incline hill you could grow. It's the hardest, right? To grow a bespoke business. I'm very lucky that, at right around the 20 mark, I started really institutionalizing middle management. And now when I'm going upwards to the 30 mark, I am really looking at putting in an executive team. So I am lucky enough that I am progressing to this idea, build to sell or whatever, just a structured institutionalized approach. And so because my team is so good, we have institutionalized the products to a certain point where they are very standard. And now I actually have people within my middle management who are specialists in some of these things. And so therefore I do have this ability to slowly make this transition. And then again, I think the most important part is you said, do I have great people? And I'm very lucky that I have great people. But what's also amazing once I standardize is if it's even more standardized, I don't need to have great people. And that's the other part that's really amazing, right? So when you have an amazingly standard process and it's very well documented, the ability to acquire talent is easier because my training is so much better and the work is so much more standard. And that's the difference between kind of the consultative approach and the productized approach. If I do consultative, I need to really hire A+ people all the time. And A+ people are hard to find. Yeah. They're not easy to find, and they're bloody expensive when you do. If I can hire a bunch of B people, no offense, okay, anyone, no offense, right? There's people in your class that were C+ people and A+ people. That's just how life is. But if you can build a business where your C+ people are operating at A- all the time because your process is so good, that's great. That's scalable. That's easier. So that's kind of why we're moving away to that approach.
It makes sense. How do you keep your talent, the guys that you want to keep? What's the strategy for keeping your best people?
I practice pretty transparent honesty with my team members. And we try our best to implement a policy where you can ask for what you want and not feel guilty. So I think there's a lot of organizations where you say, if you ask for a raise, you might feel like you might get fired, or it might be like a negative performance thing that, you know what I mean? Or, so I have tried my best to instill a policy where you can ask and you will get an honest answer and there will be no consequence of asking that question. And I think that has led to a healthy environment where I think a lot of our team members do have open conversations with me. And then the other thing that I do is we do, I don't know how, I'll be honest to say, I don't know how scalable this is going to be after I get to 50 employees, but we run a pretty loose ship when it comes to like time off or requests for times off and things like that. We really don't keep count. So I expect my team members. So the expectation for my team members is you have deadlines, you have expectations, and you have managers. If you can complete those deadlines and you can, or with an agreement with your management, with your managers, you can move those timelines, then you can request your time off. I don't care. You need to go see a doctor in the middle of the day? Fine. I don't need to know. Your dog is not feeling well. You want to take the time off. And so we really try to instill this, like, your life is very important. I'm going to butcher this number, but I feel like I think 5 of my members are all moms. So they have kids. Kids are running around, and they have to have flexibility, because I know how important it is to have a kid. I have a young daughter. And so we very much are on this stance where if someone needs to go, then just go. You don't need to beg for it, but just be accountable for your work, right? Don't disappear, ask your manager, cooperate, plan. And I think that's really helped. So I'm not going to say I'm the top paying organization, but we give a lot of, freedom. And that's where I think a lot of our employees really appreciate that.
Yeah. And there's lots of studies that have been done about moving people to 4 days a week and things like that, and giving yourself a flexibility on a Friday. I've got a friend of mine who runs an accountancy firm, and he's giving people Fridays as a day to learn something. They don't have to do any work if they don't, well, not if they don't want to, if they don't need to, but they've got an obligation to learn something new, whether it's a formal training or whether it's sort of like smaller ones. So I think there is that idea of flexibility. We're coming back to Richard Branson again. Richard Branson also gives people holidays, their own holidays, whatever they need, as exactly like you, that it's based on them doing what they need to do rather than necessarily, and actually the numbers stack up that people take less holiday when they are given the flexibility of taking it. But someone who might be making a trip to Australia then can take 4 weeks because they've got that ability to do that. So I think it is, I think it is something that can grow with your organization. It doesn't necessarily have to get to that 20 days holiday or whatever your structure is. So I think that I think there is a way of being able to make that work for a large organization. But I wanted to ask you, do you have employees or do you have entrepreneurial mindset people that sort of want to sort of work within a business and grow a business? What when you're looking for employees or looking for people to work for you, are you looking for employees or entrepreneurial spirits?
That is such a great question. And, I think when you start a business, you come in with these rose-colored glasses where you're like, you got to hire entrepreneurs because you want people like you, et cetera, et cetera. And the reality is that when you come to a scalable business, you need a mix, and you can't actually have all the same people. And the reason is because you can't actually support those people through their lifetime. Those people who are entrepreneurial mindsets want growth. And the reality is that as you grow your organization, you're not going to infinitely grow. You're not going to grow at the same level as the bottom of your totem pole, which is quite broad. And so if every single person on that bottom of that totem pole is an entrepreneur, you have to also understand your organization gets thinner and thinner as it moves up, right? So your middle management has only so many positions. Your executive team only has so many positions. So you're not going to afford their growth. You're not going to be able to give that growth unless you get acquired and they're very lucky to move into a transition of a larger organization. So you do have to balance the mix of those personalities, and you have to also recognize the pros and cons of hiring those types of individuals, right? So I will say that I do have entrepreneurial individuals, and I do just have people who are happy doing their work, meaning they are never really wanting to be managers. They've tried it. They're not interested. They're happy with what they're doing. It's their bread and butter, and they're okay with that. And there's a time and place for that. So I think for every part of your organization, there are going to be needs for entrepreneurial people, and there are going to be needs for what I call workhorses. And I don't mean that in a mean way. It just, a workhorse to me just defines a person who just enjoys their tactical work.
Yeah.
that's okay, because that's really what some people do.
Yeah, I 100% agree. You need, like I call them worker bees. You need people that are good at what they do, really good at what they do, but they don't want to start their own business. And you were talking about middle management that you've started to implement. I'd imagine that most of them aren't necessarily entrepreneurial, because managers are being a technician. If you use like the E-Myth definition, a technician, you need people that are very good at what they do. You need operational guys who are managers. Now, some entrepreneurs are not great well, actually, most of them that I've met are not great managers and don't actually do very well as a managerial role. I'm just interested how you've sort of worked through that idea of getting managers that are really good at what they do.
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're an online business owner and you want to learn what's working right now to generate leads, grow your following, and get paying clients and customers, then be sure to check out the Digital Trailblazer podcast. Each week, we feature online business owners just like you who are launching and scaling their businesses, and we reveal exactly what they're doing to rise above the competition to build a successful, profitable online business. And what's really unique about the Digital Trailblazer podcast is that you're going to learn these strategies directly from the business owners who are putting them into action and getting results. So head over to the Digital Trailblazer podcast. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, or just head over to digitaltrailblazer.com for links to all of our episodes.
I get managers who, so this is something that I've told some of my close business colleagues, especially when they're hiring for roles, be very careful hiring people who have never built process before. And I find entrepreneurial people are great at building process, in the sense that they're intuitive enough and they have enough resiliency to go through the effort to build process. What I find aren't very good process people are people who inherit process. And they claim the fame, the role, where they've never built that process. They never understood the constraints. They never understood the nuances of building that process and how it got there. They were just given a boilerplate, which works very well, and then they execute it very well, and then they think they know how to build process, which are two very different things. So in my opinion, my middle managers are here to help me operate and standardize my business, because I can't do it all myself. So generally speaking, all of my middle managers have a little bit of entrepreneurship, in the sense that they're all very comfortable being in the unknown. They're all very comfortable starting from scratch, and they're all very comfortable building a foundation to support whatever that function is or activity, and do it on their own and iterate on their own. So that's what I'm looking for. So I do have they all have technical specialties, in the sense that they're all good at like one area of marketing, but I do really look for that ability to build process. And that's where I think a lot of entrepreneurial spirit lives.
Yeah. Are you a good manager? Are you a good leader, would you say?
No, I don't think that I'm the best leader. I wouldn't classify myself as the top percentile being lead. I think I'm doing okay. I think I'm doing well, and I think I change. The reality is that I do actually really quite listen to my team, which takes a long time. One of the reasons why I scaled the business was actually one of my old time employees, Alice, who was someone I was managing quite a long time ago, came up to me. She's like, Nathan, you're never going to scale this business unless you empower me. So you have a choice: empower me or I leave. And I was like, oh God, fine. Okay. And it was incredibly uncomfortable. And Rudy, who's my head of operations, she wasn't as strong-handed, but she certainly alluded to the same result. And it took a long time for me to be comfortable with that. And honestly, ever since then, it's been hockey stick growth. So I wouldn't say that I'm natively a good leader. I have learned to be a good leader, or at least a better leader. And I think I'm always learning how to be better.
You talked about change and adaptability, and you just then were talking about that as a leader. Now, I think actually that adaptability, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, that being able to deal with the unknown and sort of embrace the unknown is really important. For you as a business, how important is change for you, and being able to deal with change, but equally your managers and your team being able to deal with that change?
massive, right? I think if you can't change as an entrepreneur, you can't let go of ego, you can't let go of product market fit, you can't let go of a client leaving and finding solutions. Like, you're not going to survive. If you're too prideful in your work, you got to realize this isn't about pride. This is about running a business. This is about supporting, and more importantly, this is about supporting the people that you've hired and keeping them, a good life. And so I think if you can't adapt to change and you're just going to succumb to change, you're going to fail. And I think this is really anything in life. If you're going to succumb to change and just give in to the fact that it's not going the way you want it to, well, you're not going to succeed. There's going to be the rare story where you fully align and there is no change and you succeed. Sure, that happens, but that's often not the case, right?
Businesses, though, aren't they? They're further along the line that have don't need to sort of have that adaptability and that pivot and being able to move. Like we'll all through COVID, everyone used the word pivot and agile in the wrong sense, but essentially that sort of ability to be able to change in COVID was massive. Everyone went on Zoom or Teams or whatever, and being able to adapt and change, I think, is super important. And I think from a leader's point of view, with the point that you made, you might not have been aware of making them, but dropping the ego of the leader or of the entrepreneur, being able to drop your ego and work forward for your business and being able to adapt and change is so important. What's your views on that, dropping the ego?
You have to. There are going to be times where you're right, and there is going to be lots and lots of times where you're going to be wrong. And if you can't drop ego, so this is a part of a book that I'm writing, which is on marketing psychology and consumer psychology. But like, there's like one very specific thing that's very obvious in like almost all the research. It's like we're inherently overconfident. We inherently, on a mental model perspective, love shortcuts. And one of those shortcuts is a self-serving overconfidence bias, right? We love to think we are right. We love to find reasons we are right. We love to natively ignore things, even though they say that we are wrong, and still think we are right. And if you know that, there's a huge probability that you will make mistakes in life and you will not do what's best for the organization. And so if you can't drop ego, if you can't seek the truth and be okay with it, I said I climbed a steep hill. That is the steepest hill you're going to climb, and you will be lucky, only lucky, if you find yourself on the other way again, if you want to continue living that way, running a business, right? Because I'm not going to say that you did it out of smarts. I'm going to honestly say, if you were constantly overconfident, constantly self-serving, constantly looking for confirmation biases, you're just going to be lucky. Now, that all being said, you could just be like WeWork and run a business up to $1 billion that isn't actually operationally feasible. That could be the said to that. But I kin a lot of that to other things, key marketing, huge network effects, key players and influencers. But not everyone's going to be like Mr. Adam. And so the reality is that if you want to do well, drop the ego.
100%. And often what happens is that entrepreneurs are the bottleneck in sort of situations because they think they can do the areas differently. But I think you've grown further than that. And I think the idea of being the person driving the strategy of the business, it feels like what you've spoken to me about, that is super important to you. So I think that's a very, very smart and a clever way to do it. For you and your business at this stage, is market share more important than profitability?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to say not market share. I'm going to say, for me, differentiation is probably the biggest and only thing that I care about right now. And fundamentally, I'm in probably one of the toughest categories to differentiate in. And marketing as a category, as a service category, tends to be also scrutinized the most. There's studies on saying that most people are most skeptical of marketers than any other service provider in the basically in the realm of service providers. So market share is certainly a thing that I care about. I don't look at market share in the sense of the total TAM. I look at it in the accessibility. So we work for Constellation, so it's very important for me to have market share in Constellation as a market. To me, my number one priority is, am I actually such a good marketer that I can create a service-based marketing business where I actually really stand out compared to every single person else? And I'm going to say I haven't achieved that yet. I think I've achieved several features that meet very difficult pain points, but I don't think I've communicated it well enough where everyone sees it that way. And so one of the big positioning things that I'm doing, because I have the case studies and the experience to say that I can do it, is we focus on amplifying revenue, and we want to be the marketing firm that specializes in supporting the sales team. And that's a very unique perspective, because more often than not, marketing companies do everything.
Shouldn't be. Like, the sales and marketing should work always together, but in a lot of companies where they're like bigger companies, they're two separate entities, which causes huge amount of problems because they're not constantly talking to each other. Just on that, marketing and sales, how do you navigate that with your business when you need to work with sales teams for clients as well?
It's very easy, actually, and again, I think this is just because some marketers just are so stuck in marketing and siloed. I go, look, everything that has to do with marketing, I don't want you touching. My goal coming into you as my goal is you guys being a potential client or my current client is I want to double or triple your productivity as salespeople. That PowerPoint that you've been working on, what's wrong with it? Infographics to sell pain points, what do you need? Case studies that suck, which ones need to be redone? Conferences you're going to, why the hell are you planning them? and really, I go to them with the lens of, I'm going to be the best damn support team you've ever had, because if I can take away 2 or 3 hours a week of every single salesperson's work, how valuable is that to the organization? So again, this is me going back to this whole idea of having marketing not just look at a hard cost, but having marketing look like it can amplify other parts of the organization. And one key point that I bring up to more mature organizations is, marketing plays a role in your talent acquisition, talent retention. They're like, how do you do that? I was like, it's very obvious. I'll give you a great example. I did such a shit poor job marketing my business when I first started that people thought I was a scam company, so they wouldn't apply. Right? So look at that. I'm a marketing company. I did such a poor job marketing that people wouldn't apply, so I couldn't get talent. Think about that. Now think about that on actually a mature perspective, where I've had a lovely team member who's actually a marketing manager, and she's very HR fluent. And we've differentiated ourselves because we put all of our values in our job responsibilities. We market our values. And I can tell you right now, 70% of the people that apply because of our values. So there's this level of marketing in HR, and people are like, oh, I've never thought about it that way. And I'm like, yeah, that's because everyone pigeonholes marketing. Everyone wants marketing to fit into this tiny little box. You drive revenue, you do creative, cool things, you do messaging, blah, blah, blah. But they don't understand this. Marketing is a toolkit that can be applied to different parts of the organization in ways to get your particular goals. But you have to know how to do that. And so we come into organizations saying, look, my job is to create value. And value creation could be revenue generation, purely revenue generation, hard dollars. And we could start with sales. You know why? Because you're a sales-led organization. Or we can do inbound, where you have no idea what the baseline is because you've never done inbound, right? So here's my pitch. I go, I'll double or triple the productivity of your sales team. Once we do that, we'll work on inbound because I've just paid for myself. And then, depending on how you like it, we can now work in other parts of the organization to either add value or cut costs, right? Because you have team members who are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, right? HR people are not copywriters, nor salespeople, but they still do copywriting all the time, yeah. Right? So that's really like how we look at it, and it's very different.
And if you're looking for differentiation in the market, I think that's one of your super skills, is being able to have that overview of other areas of the business that you can then be impactful with their marketing. So I think that is your differentiation. I think you've sort of talked about it today very with great knowledge and great experience. So I would definitely say double down on that. You seem to be doing a great job. Look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I ask the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quickfire questions. They don't need a quickfire answer. They're a little bit thought-provoking, so be prepared. First one is, what's the best decision that you've made?
In my business or in my life?
I'll leave it open to you.
I'll answer both. I would say my best decision in my business is empowering my employees and being comfortable with an incredibly uncomfortable thing. Handing off responsibilities that are very important to me. Probably the biggest change. And I think in my life, I wish I had this perspective earlier, but I was very money driven, very, very money driven. I'm very much happiness driven now. And I think that also goes to my employees. So for example, I will not put up with clients who mistreat me or my employees. And that has resulted in good relationships with my team. And that also, results in people not leaving. So I think there's a cost to keeping bad clients. There's a cost to your happiness. And I don't think we see that early enough in our life. We sometimes recognize that a bit too late. So I've recognized that in the last year or so. And I think that's also a huge change in my life that I think is very important.
I think that's super important for you as well as your employees. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
This sounds so cliche, and I think as an entrepreneur, we're sometimes very risk oriented in the sense that we want to cover our risks. But specialization, I think the issue with specialization is, I think a lot of people talk about it, and I'm sorry to all my mentors, I think you do a really piss poor job explaining why it's really important. Specialization is really important. And I'm going to say to people why I think it's important, because I feel like all my mentors just said, you need to specialize, you need to focus, because that's really important. They don't really explain why. Specialization and focus comes with a myriad of benefits. The myriad of benefits is operationally, you're going to be far more efficient. So that means you're going to be doing more things with less people. Operationally, you're going to execute better. So you're going to do more things with less people better. Operationally means you can find those people easier. On a marketing perspective, it's easier for someone to actually be convinced of your services. And so when you have specialization, you get all of these operational benefits, an incredible amount of operational benefits that could probably double or triple your productivity, in specialization. And it cuts the time in half for someone to actually believe that you do what you do. Because I am 100% sure you or anyone listening, you have gone to a vendor, and whether that's for photography, art, websites, I don't care what it is, cars, okay? When they say, I only deal with trucks, and I deal with trucks that are old and are in diesel engines, and you have a diesel car, you will naturally think that they are going to do the best job. They don't need to explain anything. But if you go to the guy who deals with electric SUVs and the newest Hummers and blah, 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 and not diesel engines, but has diesel engine in their portfolio, you know they can do the job, but you're not as convinced. So just from your specialization, you have already convinced someone halfway, if not more, that you can do a better job. So I don't think people really recognize how important that is, especially when I can tell you it takes anywhere between 30 to 50 impressions to convince someone of your brand. So imagine if you can cut that in half. That's what specialization does. So specialize.
Super. Who's helped you most in your career?
Who has helped me most in my career? I'm going to call out one of my oldest mentors, Deepak Dewan. He's in Toronto. He runs a company called Lightpoint Asset Management. Huge shout out to him. When I was 30, he gave me, he's the meanest mentor I have. He sat me down in the lounge and he said, Nathan, you have 10 years left in your life to do something good, so don't F it up. And I was like, oh, God, Deep, like that's like really like harsh. And he's like, look, Nate, you've had a lot of fun. You've learned a lot in your 20s. You got to double down. You got to specialize. And if you don't do that, Nate, I can't tell you that you can do that in your 40s. Now, I'm not saying it's never too late, but 30s is going to be a really important mark. So you know what he said to me? He said, specialize. And I did. And now look at where Find Your Audience is, right? So yeah, I think that was probably one of the hardest pieces of advice, but it really got me saying, I got to double down. And I did, and it's paid. It's paid back.
Great. Tell me about a regret that you have.
I have a regret. I have some regrets around how I actually run this business, because I think running this business has caused me to miss some opportunities. And I think it's a regret because at a certain point in my life, I had a financial goal. And I think if I went with those options, I would have met those financial goals at a very early age. At the same time, which I've talked about, is happiness. One of the reasons why I love this business and I love my team is because I love caring for them. I love educating them and I love growing them. And so I do have a regret that I think I could have left, been financially more stable, and then spent more time with my team. But in the hindsight, as some of my other good friends have told me, they're like, well, Nathan, would you have been okay leaving 15 employees who have trusted you, believed in you, wanted to work for you just so that you could earn more money? And would you be okay living with that? And is that something your daughter wants? Is that something you want your daughter to know you for? And I would say no. So it was a regret. It still is to a certain extent, because I do think it will change things. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of life lessons from that.
Absolutely. What are you most proud of?
My daughter. I'm most proud of my daughter.
How old's your daughter?
She's 19 months. She's amazing. She's cute. She's lovely, and I'm so proud to be a dad. It's changed my life. It's made me, isn't it?
Gives you a different perspective
absolutely, because that whole question of, do you want your daughter knowing that you left 15 employees on the wayside just because it was going to be better for you? And the answer is actually quite obvious. No. Very obvious answer. So using my daughter as a reference point of my life has been very sobering in very many ways, and who I want to be in my life.
Absolutely. It made a massive change to me. So I've got 7 and 9-year-old girls, and it definitely gives me a perspective on how to treat people and how you want to treat people. I think it's super important. What does legacy mean to you?
I think legacy for me is the ability to have made an impact in other people's lives in a meaningful way, and being remembered for that. And I think the more important part is just like, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't care for the remembering part. I think that plays a role in kind of the definition, the plain Jane definition of legacy. But I think for me, legacy is the impact part. Generally speaking, if you make an impact, they will remember you, but I don't care about the memory. I care about the impact. So I think my legacy is, especially for those, what I consider in my inner onion slice or my secondary onion slice, the ones that are very close to me, I want to make sure that I provide value to them. And that value could be emotional value. That value could be monetary value, but I want to provide value. And I hope that that's aligned with whatever they need at that time, right? So I don't want to shy away from monetary value, because that it might be to some people the most important thing for them at that moment in life. And if I could do that for them, that's very important. My best friend in Monaco loaned me money in the most stressful moments, no questions asked. And I will never forget that, because I also did the same for him. And that builds relationships and friendships.
So relationships are the bedrock of business. I don't care whatever business you've got, you need to have relationships with your team, you need to have relationships with your clients, and they are just super important. So 100% agree with you. And lastly, people want to know more about you or more about your business. Where should they go?
Sure. If you want to learn about my business, I'm not going to say it's the best website, but you can look us up at www.findyouraudience.online. Getting totally fully rebranded this year. We're totally repositioning ourselves. Just take it with a grain of salt. And then also, if you're just interested in learning a little bit, I am talking about a ton of marketing psychology. And you can find that on my Instagram at fya.marketingbites with a Y. Or you can just find me on LinkedIn as Nathan Young, spelled Yeung. I don't think there's a ton of Nathan Young, so you should be able to find the marketer. If you don't, I'm sure Mark will have it posted.
Thank you, Nathan. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you about you and your business. Thank you so much for your time today. Good luck in the future, and I'm sure we'll speak soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mark.
Hey everyone, so that was my interview with Nathan Young, and so I've been just thinking about this. We literally just clicked off at the end of the show, and I wanted to give you my thoughts on what we spoke about. And we very much focused today on business growth and that idea of market expansion, talent, scalability, entrepreneurs versus employees. And I think the guy is a super smart guy who has a lot of knowledge on growing businesses. And as he said, which I think is super important, as a marketing perspective, he actually has that wider idea of what a business needs to be run as well. And I think that is sometimes the disadvantage of people that are in marketing. They very much get their spend on how they can generate leads for the sales team. But it sounds like he's thinking a lot more about a wider perspective and a wider idea of what businesses need marketing for to be successful. As he said, for his clients, if it's profitability, if it's revenue, if it's market share, he will work with his clients to be able to get the right mix that he can build a business. So I found it really interesting. I think that whole idea about employees versus entrepreneurs, I think that's something that he'll learn, that probably the most effective people for within the technician side and the manager side won't be entrepreneurial. There'll probably be people that want to be managers or want to be technicians to be able to deliver that. But that's something that I think we all sort of think about as a business owner. And from my perspective, there's definitely, I work with people that are very good technicians and they don't want to start their own business. It's not what they came into it. They want a job. They want maybe career development, but they don't necessarily want a job they want a job rather than a business to run. I think it's equally important. I felt him very humble when he talked about him as a leader. I think he's a super knowledgeable guy, super intelligent guy. And I think for him, it's something that he will grow into the older he gets. I still think he's quite young. I think he's in his 30s. I think that's what he said. And I think there's still massive growth for him to be more of a leader within the organization and sometimes understand the bits that he needs to do and maybe delegating a little bit better. We didn't get into delegation. I think that's a really important point, which I will bring up with future episodes, that whole idea of how to be a great delegator when you're growing and scaling a business. So found him a really, really interesting guy. I think he's got a lot of experience, a lot of value that he can add to the world. I think equally the point he made about differentiating in the market, if you've read Purple Cow by Seth Godin, that's a really good book about differentiating the market. I think he's super knowledgeable to be able to say in marketing, like digital marketing and marketing, it's very hard to be able to differentiate you because there are a lot of people doing it. It's quite a saturated market, the marketing arena. So I would say that's something that he will learn, and he's starting to think about that, which I think is really super important for that growth of that business. And that whole idea about standardization and processes, systems and processes are the way that you're going to be able to scale a business. So I think he's on the right path. I think he has great opportunity. If he's mainly Canadian based, the US market is not that dissimilar. He could definitely expand into that. I think that would be great for his business. And hopefully he can grow the market expansion into the US and perhaps into the UK with growing his team as well. Sometimes they grow at different stages and different ways. If he can manage that, recruiting really great people as well as keep getting the market expansion, I think he'll have an amazing business. So I think it's exciting times for Nathan. I think he's got a lot of value to add, and I'm going to keep an eye on him on LinkedIn myself and see how he grows his business. I think he's got a great idea, a great business plan, and I wish him all the best luck. So if you've enjoyed this sort of after reflection point, please do drop it in the messages, either on YouTube or You can message me on a direct message on LinkedIn. If what your thoughts about the episode was, and if you are liking this sort of extra bit at the end, then please do let me know. I'd love to keep on doing it. So thank you so much for your time. It's been a great podcast. I've had a load of fun with Nathan. I think he's a great guy with a great business model. And on to the next one. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to Business Growth Talks. This podcast is released every Monday, so don't miss an episode by subscribing to all podcast platforms including Apple and Spotify. Have a great day.